Loneliness.
Loneliness.
American epidemic.
Epidemic of loneliness.
Actually hurts you more than smoking cigarettes.
Debilitating levels of
loneliness is killing me.
Loneliness. If you've watched Bo Burnham's Inside, you've heard about it before, and experts say it's as bad as eating 15 cigarettes a day. But what is loneliness really? And is it a problem? The answer to both of those questions is yes.
Because loneliness is a problem that has existed behind the shadows for too long. And I came to realize this when I first began my tenure as Surgeon General, and I traveled the country and would talk to people who would tell me that they were lonely, but they wouldn't use that word. They would say things like, I feel I have to carry all these burdens in my life by myself, or I feel if I disappeared tomorrow, nobody would care, or I feel invisible.
Don't feel anything.
Right, and it turns out that millions of people struggle with loneliness. So when you dig into the data, what you find is that about 1 in 2 adults in America was reporting levels of loneliness, and these numbers are even greater among kids. But what you also find is that loneliness has serious effects on our mental health and our physical health, raising our risk for depression, anxiety, and suicide, but also increasing our risk of heart disease, stroke, dementia, and premature death.
Loneliness is a massive problem that's only gotten worse. We know this because earlier this year, researchers published this paper. And these are the graphs they came up with. Using a national survey tracking people's habits on random days for 17 years, researchers found that between 2003 and 2020, people started spending a lot more time alone and a lot less time with friends, family, and acquaintances. Like you heard the Surgeon General explain earlier, that's a big deal. It's not like people are a little lonely so they feel sad for a bit and then happy for a bit and it all kind of evens out. We're spending a lot more time alone, which is bad for both our mental and our physical health. Everything from depression to dementia to heart disease gets worse the lonelier we are, and the data shows that's an increasingly large number of us. And while the pandemic brought this into focus and made things even worse, the researchers behind this study stressed that these trends were already there well before COVID started. We've been on this path for a while. So who do we blame? Smartphones.
We talked a lot about the phone. We talked about the way technology has changed our lives, and that it's a little more insular, even though we're connected in digital ways.
And technology has utterly transformed how we interact with one another. Now, look, tech can be good or bad. They can help us or hurt us.
Technology has transformed the way we live and work now, where these connections are happening on Zoom, online.
Phones. Could you stop that? Smartphones. In a lot of the interviews and public addresses you've probably seen about the loneliness epidemic, phones, social media, and technology in general get blamed, taking up a lot of airtime. And don't get me wrong, social media definitely has a bad effect on our mental health. We've known this for a really long time now, and just about every study we've ever done confirms it. For example, a study that came out just this year found that more social media time equals worse mental health. And as a solution, it recommends that, quote, social media users be cautious when interacting with social media features, especially likes, comments, followers, media, and posts, because of their significant effect on mental health. Yes, phone bad. But phone not only thing bad. While social media for sure has a role in this crisis of loneliness, something a lot bigger is either completely absent from or barely glossed over in these interviews. Something that socialists have known contributes to isolation for a long time. And that's alienation. For centuries now, socialist thinkers led by the dapper young Marx have anticipated that capitalism would produce the kind of acute loneliness we're experiencing today. And if you've heard about alienation before, watching these news segments can be a little frustrating. Before we explain what it is, alienation is a structural feature of our capitalist society. It's almost universal, and for the most part, out of our control. That's important, because when these reports downplay it or don't acknowledge it, which is almost always the case, it leads them to conclude that while loneliness affects a lot of people, it's ultimately an individual problem with individual solutions.
And finally, their personal practices. Look, in all of our lives, we can do simple things, like taking 15 minutes a day to reach out to and connect to someone we care about, to make sure that we are giving people our full attention when we're talking to them in conversation and aren't distracted by our phones. And
at the end of the day, as you say, the solutions are on us. It's on people, it's on individuals, on families, on groups of friends to do something. And these relationships do take work, as we're reminded. I feel like I'm in touch with
Don't get me wrong. Personal practices to improve our isolation and our mental health are good things, and they're not the only thing in the Surgeon General's report or the interview I keep pulling clips from. Both do mention larger scale approaches to this problem, like regulation for tech companies, government investment in community organizations, and improvements to public health infrastructure. It's not all bootstraps and get her dones. But a really large piece of the puzzle is still missing in these reports. There's something else that's to blame for a big chunk of the loneliness we feel that can't be addressed by either individual practices or a little extra funding for community organizations. And that's capitalism, which, especially in its neoliberal variant, produces, thrives on, and actually even demands more individualization and the ever greater atomization of our society. Let me actually explain alienation. You'll see what I mean. On the economic front, capitalism is a commodity production system. That's the engine that keeps things running. Making stuff for the sole purpose of selling it for more than it costs to make. Profit-motivated production. The way this production is organized under capitalism is by class. You have the class of people who own the resources needed to produce commodities, and those who are hired to use these resources for the production of goods. Capitalists and workers. Employers and employees. What does this have to do with alienation? It turns out, a lot. In some of his earlier works, Marx identified that the way we organize work and production under our current system alienates us, meaning it creates a separation between us and four things: nature, work, others, and ourselves. Nature, because through the logic of commodity production, it's no longer something we're a part of. It's just this dead resource we extract from to make stuff. Work, because most people work for someone else in order to make something that the other person owns. You work in a Funko Pop factory. Once you're done making that Funko Pop, it's not yours to sell. You sold your labor power, but the product of it belongs to someone else. And then there's alienation from others and ourselves. In the labor market, we are commodities. Almost all of us sell 8 or more hours of our day to somebody else. During that time, we kind of stop being people and become just another resource that yields profit for our employers.